It is February 1994, and an aging fertilizer salesman sits inside a quiet Hinds County, Mississippi courtroom. Waiting for a verdict he remains certain he will never hear. For 3 long decades, Byron de la Beckwith has lived as a free man, boasting about the devastating act he committed in 1963. He rests his frail frame against the wooden chair, banking on the rigid assumption that the legal system will protect him, just as it did during 2 previous trials that ended with deadlocked all-white juries. The heavy oak doors swing open, but the citizens filing into the jury box look entirely different from the faces he faced during the Jim Crow era. A heavy silence falls over the gallery as the foreperson stands to deliver a single decisive word. As the pronunciation of guilty echoes through the stale air, the arrogant smirk vanishes from the old man's weathered face. A 30-year battle for justice fought by a grieving widow reaches its historic conclusion. The early 1960s transformed Jackson, Mississippi, into a fractured landscape where the push for civil rights meets fierce, institutionalized resistance. Heat radiates off the pavement of Capitol Street, while rigid boundaries separate neighborhoods by race and strict local ordinances. At the center of this volatile environment stands Medgar Evers, a devoted World War II veteran who serves as the first field secretary for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in Mississippi. Evers travels across the state, driving endless miles down desolate country roads to organize voter registration drives and advocate for fundamental equality. His work challenges a powerful, entrenched network of local officials and secretive citizen councils determined to maintain the status quo. The resistance he faces extends beyond political debate, manifesting as constant intimidation, menacing phone calls, and targeted aggression. Despite understanding the lethal target placed on his back, Evers refuses to yield his position or abandon the community, relying on his voice. He maintains a rigorous daily routine, operating out of a modest office on Lynch Street where he documents acts of injustice and plans peaceful boycotts. The weight of his mission permeates every aspect of his existence. He navigates a society where law enforcement often works in tandem with aggressive supremacist groups, creating a suffocating atmosphere of paranoia. Every public speech and every filed legal brief increases his profile among individuals who view his very existence as an intolerable threat. Beyond his demanding public role, Medgar is a devoted father to 3 young children and a supportive husband to his wife, Merle. The Evers family resides in a ranch-style house situated on Margaret Walker Alexander Drive, an enclave designed for middle-class Black professionals. This residential street features mossist brick homes, concrete driveways, and manicured lawns bordered by dense thickets of regional flora. Inside their home, Muriel attempts to cultivate a nurturing, ordinary childhood for their children, Daryl, Rena, and James. The family gathers around the television, shares meals at the dining table, and discusses plans for the future. However, the external realities of Medgar's activism breach the walls of their sanctuary. The telephone rings at all hours of the night, delivering anonymous voices whispering specific, terrifying threats. Burning objects are hurled into their yard, leaving scorched patches on the grass and acrid smoke lingering in the humid air. Medgar responds to these incursions by fortifying their residence, transforming a symbol of suburban comfort into a defensive stronghold. He moves the children's beds away from the windows, placing the mattresses flush against the interior walls to shield them from potential projectiles. The psychological toll of living under constant siege shapes the family dynamic, forcing young children to absorb the heavy burden of their father's prominent position. The architecture of their daily life requires specialized survival strategies that no civilian family should ever have to learn. Medgar instructs Daryl, Rena, and James in a set of strict physical protocols designed to keep them safe in the event of an attack. He teaches the children to recognize the specific crack of a rifle and the shattering of glass. Upon hearing any sudden loud noise, they are trained to drop to the floor, crawl like soldiers into the central hallway, and lay flat in the bathtub until given the all-clear signal. Marley participates in these grim exercises, her heart pounding against her ribs as she watches her children mimic the maneuvers of combat veterans. She lives in a state of perpetual hypervigilance, anticipating the sound of unknown vehicles idling near their curb or the crunch of footsteps on the driveway gravel. Every time Medgar leaves for a speaking engagement or a rural investigation, an unspoken fear settles over the household. Marley memorizes the sound of his Oldsmobile engine, relying on that familiar mechanical hum to signal his safe return each night. Medgar himself acknowledges the immense danger, expressing to colleagues that his time on Earth might be limited. Yet, he channels that profound awareness of mortality into an unwavering commitment to his cause. The Evers home stands as a quiet fortress on Margaret Walker Alexander Drive, inhabited by a family holding the line against an invisible, encroaching malice. While the Evers family attempts to navigate this climate of hostility, figures within the segregationist movement track Medgar's movements with increasing obsession. Across the state in Greenwood, Mississippi, a fertilizer salesman named Byron Doblah Beckwith builds a reputation as an outspoken, aggressive supremacist. Beckwith travels the same rural highways as Evers, but his mission involves distributing supremacist literature and attending shadowy political gatherings. He operates within a systemic framework that encourages his extreme views, interacting with law enforcement officers and local politicians who share his rigid ideology. Beckwith views himself as a solitary soldier destined to preserve the old social order, fostering an arrogant delusion of absolute superiority. In the weeks leading up to the summer of 1963, the tension in Jackson reaches a boiling point. Mass arrests of peaceful demonstrators fill the local fairgrounds, and national media outlets shine a glaring spotlight on the city's racial strife. Medgar steps out in front of television cameras, delivering impassioned pleas for justice that broadcast into the living rooms of his fiercest detractors. The geographic distance between the civil rights leader and the individuals plotting his downfall collapses. As the humid days of early June drag on, an unseen predator finalizes a meticulous plan, mapping the exact layout of Margaret Walker Alexander Drive and identifying the ideal vantage point from which to strike. The tragic convergence of these two opposing worlds solidifies on the humid, stagnant night of June 11th, crossing over into the early hours of June 12, 1963. Earlier that evening, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy delivers a historic national television address, calling for sweeping civil rights legislation and acknowledging the moral crisis gripping the nation. Inside the Evers, residents Mirley and the children watch the broadcast, feeling a rare surge of profound hope for the future. Meanwhile, across the narrow stretch of asphalt on Margaret Walker Alexander Drive, a dense thicket of honeysuckle and sweetgum bushes rustles in the oppressive night air. This tangled wall of vegetation sits on a vacant lot, offering a perfect unobstructed view of the Evers family driveway. The distance from the brush to the concrete parking spot measures 150 feet. Concealed within the dense foliage, an assassin waits in the darkness, obscured from the glow of the distant sodium streetlights. The figure rests an Enfield 1917 .30-06 caliber rifle against a low branch, adjusting a telescopic sight to focus on the empty driveway. The heavy metallic click of the rifle bolt chambering around remains swallowed by the deafening hum of summer cicadas. Hours tick by in absolute darkness, the predator watching the quiet street with an unwavering, predatory focus. Just past midnight, the familiar, low rumble of a 1962 Oldsmobile cuts through the silence of the neighborhood. The vehicle turns onto Margaret Walker Alexander Drive, its headlights sweeping across the dark pavement before angling into the Evers driveway. Inside the house, Myrlie recognizes the distinct engine noise and feels the customary wave of relief wash over her. She shifts in her bed, expecting to hear the heavy front door open within moments. Medgar places the car in park, turns off the ignition, and gathers a large stack of National Association for the Advancement of Colored People shirts from the passenger seat. He opens the driver's side door, stepping out into the muggy night air, his silhouette illuminated by the vehicle's interior dome light. He closes the door and begins walking toward the side entrance of the house, his arms full of cotton fabric. In the brush across the street, the hidden figure shifts his weight, pressing his cheek against the wooden stock of the Enfield rifle. The crosshairs of the telesploic sight center on the space between Medgar's shoulder blades. The distance of 150 feet leaves zero margin for error, providing the sniper with a clear, devastating line of sight. A single, deafening crack splinters the quiet suburban night, echoing off the brick facades of the surrounding homes. The .30-06 caliber projectile crosses the empty street in a fraction of a second, striking Medgar in the back. The sheer kinetic impact of the round propels him forward, scattering the stack of shirts across the concrete as he collapses onto the driveway. Inside the residence, the explosive noise triggers the ingrained survival instincts Medgar had drilled into his family. Daryl, Rena, and James do not scream or freeze. They drop to the hardwood floor, pressing their small bodies flat against the ground. They scramble on their hands and knees toward the central hallway, seeking the safety of the interior walls, just as their father had instructed. Myrlie throws herself off the mattress, crawling toward the front of the house to assess the perimeter. She reaches the front door, pulling it open while staying low to the ground, her eyes scanning the dark yard for any sign of movement. The smell of burnt gunpowder drifts across the lawn, mixing with the metallic scent of copper and the sweet fragrance of the honeysuckle. Looking out onto the driveway, Myrlie makes a grim discovery that breaks her world apart. Medgar lies gravely wounded on the concrete, his vitality slipping away onto the driveway surface beneath the dim glow of the exterior lights. Myrlie rushes to his side, her agonizing cries cutting through the neighborhood silence and drawing neighbors from their homes. The children follow her out the door, standing in horror as they witness the devastating reality of the violence they had spent years preparing for. Neighbors scramble to assist lifting Medgar's failing body and placing him into the back of a station wagon. The driver speeds through the empty streets of Jackson, rushing toward the local hospital in a desperate race against time. Medical personnel transport him through the emergency doors, attempting to stabilize his catastrophic internal injuries. However, the immense physical damage caused by the high-velocity rifle round proves far too severe for modern medicine to reverse. Less than an hour after the vehicle pulled into his driveway, Medgar Evers succumbs to his fatal injury. Back on Margaret Walker Alexander Drive, local police officers begin arriving at the scene, cordoning off the area and casting flashlight beams into the dark vegetation. The civil rights movement loses one of its most courageous voices, and an arrogant predator slips away into the Mississippi night, confident that the flawed system will shield him from any consequences. In the chaotic hours preceding dawn on June 12, 1963, Jackson Police Department investigators secure the perimeter along Margaret Walker Alexander Drive. Detectives cross the asphalt street, pushing their way into the dense honeysuckle thicket located on the vacant lot opposite the Evers driveway. Flashlight beams cut through the humid darkness, revealing a trampled area of vegetation where the predator waited for his target. Deep impressions in the soft earth outline the exact position of a kneeling man, providing a spatial map of the sniper nest. A few feet away, obscured by a tangle of vines, officers secure the most crucial piece of physical evidence. They retrieve an Enfield 1917 .30-06 caliber rifle, abandoned in a rush within the brush. Investigators note a distinct heavy telesploic sight mounted to the top of the weapon barrel. Forensic specialists deduce that the short distance and high-powered round caused the heavy scope to kick back with immense force upon firing. The immense recoil would have driven the metal cylinder straight into the shooter's orbital bone, causing significant facial trauma. Crime scene technicians dust the wooden stock and the metallic scope, lifting a single, pristine fingerprint left behind in the damp summer air. The Federal Bureau of Investigation assumes control of the trace running the rifle serial number and the lifted fingerprint through their national registry. Within days, the data yields a definitive match pointing straight to Greenwood, Mississippi. The fingerprint belongs to Byron Della Beckwith, a traveling fertilizer salesman known throughout the Delta region for his militant segregationist views. Law enforcement officers arrive at his residence to execute an arrest warrant, taking him into custody without a physical struggle. During the initial booking procedure, detectives observe a severe, crescent-shaped contusion situated just above Beckwith's right eye. The bruised laceration matches the exact dimensions of the Enfield talisblochic site, verifying the recoil theory established at the crime scene. Additional investigative legwork produces an eyewitness who places a white Plymouth Valiant, a vehicle matching Beckwith's company car, parked near the vacant lot hours before the crime. Despite the overwhelming physical link and the obvious facial injury, Beckwith displays zero anxiety during his interrogations. He sits inside the interrogation room with his shoulders relaxed, projecting the arrogant confidence of a man operating under a protective shield. His defense attorneys begin crafting an alibi, claiming their client was miles away in Greenwood while someone else stole his rifle. The prosecution prepares for a 1964 trial, running headlong into the rigid exclusionary laws governing the Mississippi judicial system. Strict poll tax requirements and discriminatory voter registration tests bar black citizens from the jury pool. When the trial commences, a panel composed of 12 white men sits in the jury box to determine the fate of the accused. The first trial begins in February 1964, transforming the Hinds County Courthouse into a theater of institutionalized hostility. The prosecution presents the fingerprint evidence, introduces the recovered rifle, and calls the eyewitness to the stand to connect the white Plymouth Valiant to the scene. Marley Evers sits in the gallery, enduring the profound psychological weight of breathing the same stale courtroom air as the man who shattered her family. The defense counters the forensic facts with testimonies from Greenwood police officers who provide statements supporting Beckwith's fabricated timeline. The systemic corruption safeguarding the defendant materializes in the middle of the proceedings through a deliberate, calculated display of power. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom open, and Ross Barnett, the fierce segregationist and former governor of Mississippi, strides down the center aisle. Barnett bypasses the gallery, walks straight into the defense area, and shakes Beckwith's hand in full view of the 12 seated jurors. This physical gesture acts as a silent, undeniable instruction from the highest echelon of state politics, validating the defendant and intimidating the prosecution. Marley watches this exchange, recognizing the devastating reality that the legal system operates as an active conspiracy against her pursuit of justice. After hearing the closing arguments, the jury retreats to the deliberation room to weigh the mountain of physical evidence against the state-sponsored theater. They return to the courtroom to announce an irreconcilable deadlock, failing to reach a unanimous verdict. The presiding judge strikes his gavel, declaring a mistrial and scheduling a second attempt for later that spring. Preparations for the second 1964 trial initiate a hidden mechanism of state interference that bypasses all legal boundaries. The Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission, a clandestine, taxpayer-funded state intelligence agency designed to suppress civil rights activities, intervenes through secret channels. Commission investigators obtain the official list of prospective jurors weeks before the trial date. State agents canvass neighborhoods, interview employers, and cross-reference voting records to compile extensive psychological profiles on every potential juror. They document the racial views, political affiliations, and social vulnerabilities of each man on the list, gathering sensitive intelligence forbidden in a fair legal proceeding. Operatives hand-deliver these detailed dossiers straight to Beckwith's defense attorneys, violating fundamental principles of jurisprudence. Armed with this stolen insight, the defense strikes any moderate candidates from the selection pool, seating a jury rigged from the start to ignore the forensic facts. The prosecution presents the Enfield rifle, the fingerprint, and the matching facial contusion, a second time unaware of the structural sabotage occurring behind closed doors. Marley Evers endures another grueling round of testimony, forcing herself to maintain composure while the defense attorneys parade their rehearsed alibi witnesses. When deliberations conclude, the second trial ends the exact same way the first did, resulting in another deadlocked jury and a subsequent mistrial. The district attorney declines to pursue a third prosecution, citing the impossibility of securing a conviction under the current social climate. Byron de la Beckwith walks out of the Hinds County Courthouse as a free man, enveloped in an aura of absolute invincibility. Returning to his home in the Mississippi Delta, Beckwith embraces his new status as a hero among extremist factions. He faces zero legal restrictions on his movement, utilizing his freedom to attend Ku Klux Klan rallies, citizen council meetings, and private political fundraisers. Standing before crowds of sympathetic listeners, he abandons his fabricated alibi and begins boasting without reservation about his actions on Margaret Walker, Alexander Drive. He travels across state lines to speak at rallies in Louisiana and Arkansas, framing the devastating attack as a necessary military strike in private conversations. He provides chilling specific details about the honeysuckle thicket, the heavy rifle recoil, and the exact distance across the street. The prosecution files remain boxed away in the archives, collecting dust while the perpetrator builds a public legacy upon his own admitted guilt. Marley Evers and her 3 children move away from Jackson, attempting to rebuild their shattered lives in California, but the psychological torment follows them. They watch television broadcasts and read newspaper clippings documenting Beckwith's political campaigns and public appearances, forced to endure the agonizing reality of his untouchable status. Throughout the 1970s and into the 1980s, law enforcement agencies ignore the arrogant confessions, citing the previous double mistrials as an impassable legal barrier. Beckwith ages into his 70s, settling into a comfortable routine in Signal Mountain, Tennessee, convinced he has outlasted the reach of the law. The impenetrable wall protecting the arrogant supremacist shatters on October 1st, 1989. Jerry Mitchell, a determined investigative reporter working for a local Jackson newspaper, receives a tip regarding a cache of sealed government documents. Mitchell bypasses institutional roadblocks and acquires leaked, confidential files originating from the now-defunct Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission. Examining the yellowed pages, the reporter discovers the precise memorandums detailing the illegal juror screening operations conducted during the second 1964 trial. The documents list the specific names of state investigators who gathered the intelligence and confirm the transfer of those files to the defense team. Mitchell publishes a massive front-page article laying out a step-by-step paper trail of the state-sponsored sabotage that robbed the Evers family of a fair trial. The detailed publication sends shockwaves through the Mississippi legal community, destroying the narrative that the previous trials were conducted under lawful procedures. Marley Evers reads the investigative report from her home on the West Coast, realizing she possesses the tangible proof required to break the stalemate. She travels back to Hinds County, marching into the local government buildings with the leaked articles in hand. She corners public officials, bombards the district attorney's office with legal demands, and pressures the state to correct its historic failure. Her relentless campaign forces the judicial system to acknowledge the fraudulent nature of the 1964 proceedings, setting the stage for an unprecedented legal resurrection. Assistant District Attorney Bobby DeLauter initiates the official reopening of the investigation in the final months of 1990. The ambitious prosecutor faces a monumental legal challenge built upon 3 decades of institutional neglect. Hinds County archives resemble a graveyard of forgotten documents filled with dust and mislabeled cardboard boxes. Crucial witnesses occupy local cemeteries, leaving empty voids in the historical record. The original crime scene photographs suffer from severe degradation, their chemical emulsion peeling away from the backing paper. A profound hurdle emerges when investigators search the central evidence vault for the primary physical link. The 1917 Enfield .30-06 caliber rifle is absent from the custody racks. State protocols during the intervening years permitted clerks to purge or re-sign physical items following a mistrial declaration. Prosecutors hesitate to proceed without the heavy wooden weapon, viewing its absence as a fatal blow to any future conviction. The physical space connecting the assassin to the victim appears broken beyond repair. DeLauter refuses to surrender to the systemic bureaucratic failure. He commands a methodical review of ancient property logs, tracing the ink signatures of every man who acts at the vault. The tedious paper trail leads the prosecution past the confines of the police department and into the home of a local judge. Years passed. This presiding official utilized his unquestioned authority to remove the weapon from the evidence room, treating the historical artifact as a personal souvenir. DeLauter dispatches investigators to the judge's residence, a spacious property filled with hunting gear and memorabilia. Detectives search the interior closets, pulling back old garments to reveal the familiar wooden stock and heavy telescopic sight. They interview the judge's son, who recounts a chilling memory from his childhood. The boy remembers his father pointing to the weapon and stating that it was the exact gun used to end Medgar Evers. Forensic technicians transport the rifle back to the state laboratory, comparing the metal serial numbers against the 1963 intake forms. The engraved digits provide an absolute, undeniable match, armed with the original weapon and the leaked Sovereignty Commission documents. A grand jury issues a new indictment. Law enforcement officers travel to Signal Mountain, Tennessee, to extract the 73-year-old predator from his comfortable retirement. Extradition papers force Byron de la Beckwith back across state lines and into a Hinds County holding cell. The historic trial commences on January 27, 1994, inside the same courthouse where the state previously shielded the defendant. The physical environment mirrors the past, featuring the same oak paneling and heavy double doors. Beckwith sits at the defense table, his weathered face projecting the same unyielding arrogance he displayed 3 decades earlier. He expects the old supremacist network to deploy another rescue operation. The defense team leans on the ancient fabricated timeline, attempting to place their client far from Margaret Walker, Alexander Drive. The prosecution counters this strategy by unleashing an overwhelming arsenal of new testimonies. DeLauter calls former Ku Klux Klan associates and casual acquaintances to the witness stand. These individuals swear under oath, recounting specific conversations where the defendant bragged about his lethal actions. They describe his detailed descriptions of the honeysuckle thicket. They testify about his complaints regarding the heavy recoil of the telescopic sight. The trap snaps shut. His decades of untouchable boasting provide the exact statements necessary to destroy his fabricated alibi. The mask of impunity crumbles. The arrogant predator realizes his own incessant need for recognition forged the chains of his ultimate undoing. Closing arguments conclude, sending the case to the deliberation room on the first week of February. The initial jury vote on February 4th produces a terrifying echo of the past, resulting in an 8-4 deadlock favoring conviction. Tension radiates through the courthouse corridors as Myrlie Evers paces the marble floors, fearing another systemic collapse. The presiding judge refuses to declare a mistrial, ordering the jurors into an overnight hotel sequestration to continue their debates. The 12 citizens, representing a stark contrast to the all-white panels of 1964, consist of 8 black members and 4 white members. They return to the courthouse on the morning of February 5, 1994, displaying a unified front. The heavy doors swing open, and the gallery descends into a breathless silence. The foreperson stands, reading the unanimous verdict of guilty into the official record. The judge strikes his gavel, sentencing the 73-year-old to spend the remainder of his natural life inside a state penitentiary without the possibility of parole. Myrlie Evers unleashes 30 years of suppressed agony, crying out in jubilation as her family surrounds her. The arrogant smirk vanishes from the convicted man's face, replaced by a hollow stare of defeat. Armed officers place the elderly supremacist in shackles, guiding him away from the courtroom to transfer him to the Mississippi State Penitentiary. The heavy iron bars slide shut, stripping him of the perceived racial hierarchy he once enforced with lethal aggression. He commands his defense attorneys to file a barrage of appeals, desperate to exploit any remaining legal loopholes. The appellate lawyers argue that the 30-year delay violated his constitutional right to a speedy trial, demanding an immediate reversal of the conviction. The state Supreme Court reviews the extensive petitions, examining the mountain of evidence documenting the clandestine Sovereignty Commission interference. The higher court justices deliver a crushing blow to the defense strategy, rejecting every single argument presented. They rule that the state-sponsored sabotage during the 1964 proceedings nullified any legitimate claim to legal protection regarding the timeline. The judicial system corrects its own historic corruption, cementing the life sentence and blocking all avenues of escape. The prisoner spends his remaining years trapped inside a sterile, concrete cell, isolated from the society he attempted to terrorize. The brutal reality of his permanent confinement shatters his lifelong delusion of invincibility. The passage of time erodes the prisoner's physical health, leading to a severe decline as the new millennium begins. On January 21, 2001, correction officers transport the 80-year-old inmate from his maximum security block to a Jackson hospital. He draws his final labored breath under the strict supervision of the state, dying as a condemned man with zero public fanfare. His forgotten demise stands in profound contrast to the towering, enduring legacy of his victim. Medgar Evers rests in honor at Arlington National Cemetery, recognized as a monumental figure who laid the groundwork for fundamental equality. Myrlie Evers remains a symbol of unyielding resilience, proving that relentless pressure can pierce the most formidable shields of institutional corruption. The landmark Hinds County conviction establishes a powerful legal precedent, sparking the successful reopening of numerous civil rights cold cases across the American South. Investigators and prosecutors utilize the blueprint forged by Bobby DeLaughter to hunt down other aging predators hiding behind decades of silence. The conclusion of this 30-year battle delivers an undeniable message to the entire nation. The arc of the moral universe bends with resistance, but no amount of time can extinguish the burning demand for absolute accountability.